Hello, my name is Donna Harp Ziegenfuss, and I'm an associate librarian at the University of Utah in the J. Willard Marriott Library. Today, I'm going to talk about a research project that involved the intersection of autoethnography research and concept analysis research as a way to explore and better understand the meaning of the concept boundary crossing. The idea of boundary crossing emerged as a major theme and theoretical underpinning of my autoethnography research. But before doing my autoethnography, I did not know about this theory, and I was looking for some additional clarification about the concept before moving forward. I'm going to define the process of concept analysis that I used, which is something that I also never really heard about before doing this research, and looking for different variations of how boundary crossing is used in the literature. I'm going to present some of the themes of my autoethnography that I had been working on for the past year or so, and how that can be used as what Schwartz, Barrett, and Kim call fieldwork in their concept analysis process. I want to look at the difference and similarities between the use of boundary crossing in different disciplines, and I want to propose why I am now considering boundary crossing as the focus of my research. I have found other topics related to boundary crossing, like Celia Whitchurch's model, the third space professionals in higher education. So let's take a look at concept analysis. It's a method that's used to identify, analyze, and refine concepts, and it's usually done at the beginning phases of theory development. It's a method used more by applied science disciplines, like, for example, nursing or business. A lot of the different versions of concept analysis came out of nursing, however, such as those listed here, but each model has a different structure or set of steps or processes. I decided to use the Schwartz, Barcott, and Kim hybrid model. That is a three-phase process of 1, a theoretical phase, 2, a fieldwork phase, and 3, the final analysis phase. I chose this model because of the fieldwork phase. I was looking for a way to integrate my autoethnography data with the concept analysis of boundary crossing, and this model has been used for exploring nursing identity or nursing presence, something very similar to my own research of looking at the identity of a boundary crosser. So here's what the model looks like. In phase 1, I conducted a literature review and searched a broad body of literature through Google Scholar because of the interdisciplinarity of the topic and a strong presence abroad as well as in the US. I was surprised how boundary crossing was a thread across so many disciplines. I used the literature to clarify the definition of boundary crossing and the attributes and consequences of boundary crossing. I identified related concepts and subtopics. In phase 2, I pulled in my autoethnography data about my experience as a feral librarian. A feral librarian is a librarian without a library degree, and a disorienting dilemma, as Mesereau would call it, about being called a feral librarian was what started my autoethnography in the first place. And also, I am a self-professed boundary crosser. I've been through numerous careers, from science to instructional design, to K-12, to higher ed, and to education. Someone who's always stepping over boundaries on a regular basis. So I wanted to test the alignment of my experience as a boundary crosser with the experiences in the literature. In the final phase, the analytical phase, I analyzed, compared, and contrasted, and searched for a new understanding of boundary crossing to help me move forward in my literature review and in my research. So let's take a look at some of the definitions that I found related to boundary crossing. Here are 4 different definitions that resonated with me. As a librarian, I am always proactively pushing out of the library, working across disciplines and different practices. The article about boundary crossing and boundary objects by Baker and Eckerman was the very first article I uncovered as I was searching to connect my autoethnography to the literature. Lisa Starr talks about the pushing of boundaries beyond the in and out of field spaces. This is something that I do on a regular basis as a librarian. The Engstrom quote, coming from the workplace and vocational education literature, talks about the boundary space as a hybrid situation. And that is definitely something that I could relate to. As a librarian, the practices and context of disciplinary faculty I work with, and I help shape my practice and provide new perspectives on my practice as I work with different disciplines, living on the fringes of the library and outside of the silos of disciplines. This last quote, using the terminology boundary spanning instead of boundary crossing. Boundary spanning is used more in the business and public administration literature, as well as the leadership literature. But you can see it is focusing on similar concepts of coordinating activities, connecting processes, and getting to understand the organizational context, all themes that emerged from my autoethnography writing as well. As part of the gathering of articles for the literature review, I found 1,032 articles with the words boundaries, boundary crossing, or boundary spanning in the title, and I sorted them into 5 categories. 112 articles were just about boundaries in general. 205 articles were about general boundary crossing. 198 articles focused on boundary spanning. 180 articles looked at using boundary objects in boundary crossing, and 337 articles were about what is called boundary practice or boundary work. Articles spanned a variety of disciplines: business and management, education, leadership, entrepreneurship, innovation, the sciences, healthcare, organizational development, international studies, information science, computing, environmental sciences and sustainability, language and communication, engineering, diversity and equity, nursing, and social work, just to name a few. This is one of the prominent models in the boundary crossing literature. This is from the work of Ackerman and Baker from their published article about boundary crossing and boundary objects. This model addresses the issue of learning while working at the boundary, something that emerged over and over again in my autoethnography as I was looking at what I was learning living in the fringes and how I was applying that learning. And also crossing boundaries and living in the fringes of librarianship. This model aligns well with my autoethnography process that focuses on identity, reflexivity, transformation, and discussing my interactions and relationships with faculty. In phase 2, I revisited my autoethnographic writing, now using the lens of boundary crossing and transdisciplinary themes that I learned about while I was doing the literature review. This slide shows on the left-hand side some of the themes that emerged from my autoethnography research, which are serendipity, learning to cope with the insider-outsider dilemma, building on the foundation of past experiences, leveraging the synergy of varied professional skill sets, growing connections and relationship building, and boosting confidence through identity development. In the very beginning, when I was called a fellow librarian, I was having some real imposter syndrome feelings and attitudes and wondering whether I had made the correct decision to go into library work. On the right is boundary crossing in the literature. You can see how there's a strong overlap for examples about how a theme from my writing, leveraging the synergy of varied professional skill sets, could align to that category of boundary work or practice, or how my learning to cope the insider-outsider dilemma theme that emerged from my writing would deal directly with the challenges of working at the boundary. In phase 3, I coded the abstracts of the article using autocoding in NVivo, and then manually coded a selection of articles from each of the categories to triangulate the autocoding themes that emerged. I recalculated my ideas of the differences between boundary crossing and boundary spanning, and also refocused more on attitudes and dispositions of a boundary crosser rather than on the articles focused on the roles and responsibilities of the boundary crosser. So you can see from this chart, in the first column are my coding themes that emerged from the articles that were coded in the literature review. And each of the columns is the percentage of numbers of times those codes were used in each of the 5 different categories of articles. So I evaluated the percentage of coding from my main themes and then looked at the abstract analysis to look at how often these occurred within those 5 categories. My themes that emerged: boundary skill sets, challenges and opportunities, organizational culture, roles and responsibilities, structural issues, and types of boundary work, overlapped with my autoethnographic rating findings directly. 4 of the types of articles all had the highest percentage of coding in the roles and responsibility of boundary crosser theme. Many articles discuss what a boundary was and how they were working at a boundary from their particular discipline. However, the one that really intrigued me was the highest coding percentage of boundary skill sets, 38.7%, in a more general boundary crossing category of articles. When I evaluated this, the theme was more about the dispositions and soft skills that boundary crossers use, such as good communication, problem solving, being open to new ideas, being a good listener, and being okay with taking risk. The organizational cultural theme also interests me now that coming out of this research. Although there were no really high percentages in any one category of articles, most were in the mid 20% range in 4 of the 5 categories. This was a unique finding and something that I will definitely need to pursue investigating more. So where do I go from here and what are my next steps? I have a better clarity about the boundary crossing concept, and I can connect previously disparate pieces of my autoethnography vignettes together. I will be using this new perspectives that I uncovered to move forward into the next step of writing. I'm going to go back and enhance my autoethnography writing now that I have a richer understanding of the boundary crossing concepts and I can make a better connection to theory. I will begin a research agenda that involves reaching out to other higher education boundary crossers, looking for similarities and experiences across disciplines. I will be reflecting on how boundary crossing is connected to the importance of developing 21st century skills and transdisciplinary work skills, not just for librarians and other higher education professionals, but also students who will be graduating into more disciplinary and boundary crossing careers. So I have 2 slides of references here that you can go back and take a look at. And I want to thank you for listening to my study. Feel free to contact me with questions. My email is below. And also I have some additional resources that I've been setting up related to my autoethnography presentations and the literature. Thank you very much.